Now, how good at self-control are you? Would you describe yourself as a materialistic person? You may or may not be good at working out your own personality traits, but there are clues out there in the footprints we leave in the digital world, and even in our spending habits. Joe Gladstone is Assistant Professor in Consumer Behaviour at University College London. And as well as looking at spending habits and self-control and materialism, he's looked at the so-called Big Five personality traits. No, not lions, not rhinos, but openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness and neuroticism. So how, in theory, can you go about predicting the type of person someone is simply from what they buy?
There's been this transformation that's happened where now almost all of our spending is through these digital ways of doing things. So, the cards we use to spend money on, Apple Pay, whatever else it is, these leave a digital record of how we spend. And we wanted to see if these records could be used to predict your personality.
So did you ask people if you could have a look at their records then and then get them to fill in questionnaires, personality questionnaires as well?
Exactly. So this was work done in partnership with a fintech app based in the UK. And so we managed to get over 2,000 people to answer these detailed personality questions. And they also agreed as part of this survey to match their transaction records with the fintech app. So this was all of their spending across all of their different bank accounts that went into this app. And we used all of those as inputs, as things that we could use to predict their personality with.
And what did you find? Could you predict their personalities based on what they spent?
We certainly were able to have a good hunch about what kind of person you are. Certainly we could tell if you were a very extroverted person or a very introverted person, very organised. But these were not perfect predictions. It's not the case that I can just look at your bank statement and tell exactly who you are. But in some ways that's not the point. Because now that we've got all these digital records about us that exist in the world, it's not just your spending that I could look at. If I was to match your spending with, say, what you browsed on the internet or some other kind of what we call digital footprints you left behind, then we imagine that these different sources might give us different pieces of the puzzle. And so if we were to use different sources, we might well be able to get to a kind of perfect prediction of who you are.
So you can try and get a more and more detailed picture of what a person is like. And they're quite interesting, some of these. I mean, some of them are not that surprising. So people who were more open to experience were more likely to spend more on flights. So I guess they're going abroad, adventuring, which we might expect. And the people who were more agreeable donated more to charity. Were there any that surprised you a bit more in there?
So if I'm honest with you, I think when you look en masse, so here we're looking at millions of transactions and we're looking at thousands of people. Whenever you look en masse, you kind of see stereotypes. You see exactly kind of the most obvious answer. Yes, conscientious people saved more. Yes, very outgoing people went to clubs and drank and went out more. So in some ways, no, I think that everything did fit more or less what we expected in terms of those simple patterns. But what these predictions are based on is not just based on how much you spent on dining and drinking predicts your extroversion. It's this complex machine learning model that is thinking about the interactions with all these things. It's the pattern of your spending across all of these different categories. And so that's what's really leading to this prediction. But what's interesting is that we have different strengths for different personality categories. So, for example, we do struggle to predict these very broad personality traits, like how organised you are, which we call conscientiousness, or how nice you are, which we call agreeableness. But for more specific traits, so how self-controlled a person is, how much they're able to kind of control their impulses, and also how materialistic they are, how much they think that buying stuff is going to bring them happiness. In those cases, our predictions are much stronger, like almost twice as strong. And so in some ways, what's interesting is what kinds of things can we predict about people from what they buy.
And if you can make these predictions, what can you then do? How can you use these?
These could be used in a wide variety of ways, and we should see this in some ways more as a method than just as an answer. So, for example, we can imagine that there's lots of things that society really cares about. So, for example, people get very stressed about their money. People are worried. It's a really massive crisis, actually, that so many people get stressed about their money. Now, we also know that people being stressed about their money leads them to feel shame, that they're too ashamed. They don't tell their partners or their friends about that. So our method would be a way, for example, that a bank, or they could be enforced through some kind of agency, to predict in advance, or at least automatically, who was feeling very worried and stressed about their money, and interventions could be put in place to help them. So even though we're looking here at personality, the same approach could be used for kind of any psychological outcome. So if we're worried about stress or happiness or all these other things that society cares about, then we could use this. Obviously, this could also be used for potentially negative things too. Like, this is the kind of approach that's being used right now to market people different goods and services. And my answer to if this is a good thing or a bad thing would simply be that it matters what we're trying to predict, that we should be using these tools to try and help people and not just sell them stuff.
So a company could work out who the people with the least self-control were and then try and market them particularly expensive items to try to get them to buy those, which would not be a good thing.
They could do that. In some ways, I think that the kind of approach we're using, it's not the most sophisticated algorithm in the world. You know, there's definitely some whizzy machine learning company out there in Silicon Valley who's doing a better job of this stuff. So I don't see this as us telling businesses how they should do things. We're saying that this is possible. And so maybe this is a call to arms about, do we think this is acceptable? And if we don't, then we kind of maybe need regulation. At the same time, I don't think these things can really be regulated. We can't unknow these things. The kinds of things that we're doing here is what a computer science undergraduate is learning in their first year. So in that sense, there is no real way to put this stuff back in a box.
Joe Gladstone. So Daryl, maybe the answer is to find the best ways of using it for people.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting study for a number of reasons. I think, to me, it really flags this idea that we have a digital footprint. But I suppose what I'd like to see happen is, a bit as alluded to in the interview, is start using our digital footprint for the good. So we could use our digital footprint to tailor interventions. We could tailor health interventions, behaviour change interventions, reflecting all the other aspects of the information that we give in our everyday life and our phones and our habits. So this is exciting, and I hope with it's used with the appropriate sort of care and we avoid issues to do with the Cambridge Analytica type scandal. If we're careful, this is certainly a promising way forward.